Many years ago, when I was 11, I loved spending evenings in my backyard. On this particular evening I was there with my 2 dogs. After a while the neighbor's dog started barking. I thought nothing of it until my dogs started barking and growling, and they were looking at the backyard door. So I start going over to tell them to be quiet, when I look towards the door and see red glowing eyes looking at me. I stopped and the dogs growled even harder, and now all the neighbor's dogs are barking. So I shout out, "Get out of here," and I run towards it. Yes, 11 years old me, very dumb idea. I look over the door and see it running away. It had on a black trench coat, boots and a fedora hat. Many things happened while living in this house. 1980s Norwalk, CA. When I was in my first year of high school, I was on tech crew, the people who work backstage for plays and performances. I was working late one night, probably about 11:30 at night, and was screwing on a door for the set of Arsenic and Old Lace, when I heard a clicking, like when you click your tongue, sound come from the boys' bathroom. I yelled out to my head tech, who was the only other person there, and he answered from the tech booth at the other end of the auditorium from the sound. He came down to me and we went to check out the boys' bathroom. When we got in there, I had this intense feeling of dread. We then heard the clicking from out on the stage, so we went out there and heard it from the storage room. We went in there and heard it up the ladder that leads to the catwalk. I was ready to be done, but my head tech convinced me to walk with him up there. We got up there and were looking around when we heard it from under a piece of plywood. This plywood wasn't bolted down or anything, it was just placed down. We removed it and discovered a whole new room. It was too dark to see into, and you had to climb the wall to get down it, so me and the head tech said screw this, and packed up and left. No one knows about the hidden room, and I swore I would never tell anyone of it. I was probably like 12/13 and I decided I was gonna be rebellious and sleep on the couch in the living room, so I could watch TV after my parents went to bed. It was probably like 2 or 3 in the morning and I finally was getting sleepy, so I turned the TV off and went to turn around and face the back of the couch to sleep. But just as I started to, I caught a figure standing in the hallway connected to the living room. It was really tall, like taller than anybody who lived in my house. The head was really close to the ceiling and pitch black, but it had a human figure. I stared at it for a second, then rolled over and closed my eyes really tight, wanting it to go away. After a couple minutes I gathered the courage to look up again and it was gone. I know it wasn't anybody in my house because the figure was so tall, and there was absolutely no noise from feet or anything else. This is a long one and I'm on mobile. Sorry for any misspelling, etc. When I was about 4, my family and I lived in Chicago. We lived in a small apartment and of course I shared a bedroom with my sister who was 6. We had a bunk bed and across the bunk bed was a closet with a red light bulb that stayed on because my mom used it as a night light. Well, one night my sister told me to close the door and I refused to because I was half asleep. She then whispered that she sees someone in there and to close the closet door because she doesn't want them coming out. Spooked, I got up and closed it. As I turned to head to my bed I seen bright lit up green eyes staring at me. I kept repeating to myself that they have to be my light up shoes and I'll verify that in the morning. Next morning I got up and immediately looked under my bed to find nothing. Fast forward to when I was 9. My parents got divorced and my mom, my sister and I moved into the basement of my grandma's house. There, us 3 shared a bed. My sister in one bed and my mom and I shared a pull-out bed. My mom got really depressed and would go out and drink all night. Well, one night I cried for her not to go, but she promised me she would come home early. Then went out with her friends. It was about 3 AM when I heard the front door open and steps walking towards our room. I turned to look at the doorway and could see a shadow coming towards us and the loud noise of heels getting closer and closer. The shadow stops in the doorway and slowly opens the door and stands there. Being 9, I sat up and said "Mom," which I get no reply. I get scared and lay down and turn my back to the door. When I do, the shadow comes closer, lays on the bed, and I can feel their shoulder touching my back, which is weird because my mom sleeps opposite, so her feet are always next to my head. I slowly turn around and see a girl laying next to me. long hair, and looking at the ceiling. Again, I say mom thinking she's drunk, but then the girl looks at me with the same bright green eyes I seen that night in Chicago, and I get so scared I lay back down and freeze. I closed my eyes and kept repeating it wasn't real. I ended up falling asleep, and waking up the next morning to everyone eating breakfast. I'm not sure what it was, or who, but it's something I'll never forget. Although the whole family agrees my grandma's old house was haunted. About 20 minutes away from my house, there is this local haunted road known as Cuba Road. It's most known for the cemetery, White Cemetery, which is normally unguarded and unsupervised. It's unfortunate that many people will come to the cemetery to desecrate the graves and vandalize the area. We, on the other hand, just wanted to get a good spook, so me and 4 of my friends decided to drive down there and go inside the cemetery. As always, the main gate wasn't locked, it was actually wide open so a car could fit, and we found it easy to get in. Unlike the other times, I decided to bring my spirit box that uses white noise for spirits to communicate through. All of us were skeptical it would work, but sure enough, after 5 minutes, we started getting some serious answers. We would ask things like, "Do you guys want to talk with us or are we disturbing you?" All answers were relatively positive. We asked if they knew our names, and if they could say them. 3 out of 5 of our names were said by the same male voice, but would not give us his name when asked. After we were there for 10 or so minutes, a grey sedan passed us by very slowly, stopped for a bit, and then made a U-turn and left. There were no stop signs that would cause him to stop for as long as he did. We were a bit suspicious of this car, but didn't make any movement to leave. We continued with questions for another 2 minutes, until the spirit box said, "Coming and run." We were a bit spooked at the sudden change of positive comments. We thought we upset the spirit because they then went on to say hurt her, and one of my female friends felt a tug on her shirt. "Leave, run, will hurt." Obviously, we were creeped the flip out and drove away, toward the direction the car went after he made his U-turn. Instead of making a 3-point in the middle, we pulled onto a side street with houses and pulled into a driveway to turn around. We stopped for a second to decide what the next plan was. We all agreed to go visit this abandoned house that was set for demolition not so far away, before turning back towards the cemetery since that was the direction we needed to go in. We drove relatively slow, going over what had just happened, when we noticed that same grey sedan was parked inside the cemetery. The gates were still open. They were sitting, waiting. When they saw our car, they pulled out of the cemetery and began to follow us. Everyone was sort of like, "Okay, there's this weird car behind us. Maybe they live somewhere here." We thought that if we turned on Rainbow Road, a side street, that it would prove they weren't following. This was not the case, as the car turned with us. A few more turns around the block and we noticed that it was still following. That's when we decided that the best idea was to drive to the nearest police station. We ended up losing the car before we got there, but it was creepy nonetheless. I can't help but think that car was waiting for us in that cemetery, or waited for us to come back since they obviously noticed what car I drove. It might be a stretch, but I believe the spirits were warning us of potential danger that could have happened if we stayed in the cemetery when that car returned. This was one of the scariest things that has happened to me to this day. I told my mom and brothers the next morning, but they didn't believe a word I said, told me it was my imagination. At the time I was about 12 years old or so, and my older brother's room was just outside mine. We only had a 3-bedroom house, so the downstairs living area had to be turned into a bedroom for the boys. So the stairs to the basement led right into their room and I had to go through their room to get upstairs. At this time my TV was facing my doorway, so any light from my TV directly shined into the boys' room. In the middle of the night I was up watching my TV, sitting in front of it with my back to my open door, when I started to feel like someone was behind me staring at me. I get this feeling a lot, but that time was much different. The feeling of being watched was even worse than ever. I turned around in my chair and saw a very tall black shadow standing half in my doorway. It was the shape of a tall man with broad shoulders, and I could see my brother in his bed behind this shadow man. I stared at him for what felt like forever before I got out of my seat faster than I had probably ever moved before, and it was gone. My brothers were dead asleep in their beds. I couldn't even wake them up after I stood up. There wasn't even the sound of the stairs creaking or footsteps upstairs. It was the dead of night and everyone in the house was asleep. It scared the heck out of me, and I don't like to tell people because I know that nobody will ever believe it. I've had a few experiences with shadow people since, but that one gave me the biggest heart attack.